Hi there and welcome to the latest edition of The Front Page, a Racing Post news, review, analysis, commentary programme and plenty to discuss again this week, and discussing it with me here in our London studio, my colleague Jonathan Harding. Hello Jonathan.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Well?
Very well, very
glorious. Well. And at home in Huddersfield, Mr. Keith Melrose, a Racing Post betting editor. Hi Keith.
Hello gents, how are we?
Good, thank you. You enjoying the crossover period between flat and jumps?
April and October are probably my two busiest months in terms of watching races, because I'm still doing my flat shift in my beat sprinters, but last week I'm back on doing the chases again. So yeah, these are just about the two busiest times of year for me. That
being the case, Keith, we'll try to make sure that we get through this programme seamlessly with no need for endless re-records. And what are we going to be discussing in this week's edition? We'll be starting by asking Crisis what crisis. You could certainly be looking at that based on the eye-watering numbers at last week's opening book of the Tattersalls October yearling sale. We'll be asking to what extent those numbers are a true reflection of the current racing and bloodstock industry. Countless racing fans will be looking forward to Boyd hopefully ending his career in flawless fashion at Ascot on Saturday. One of those who'll be trying to beat him is Adayar's jockey William Buick, and on Saturday he'll be crowned British champion flat jockey for the first time. We'll look at his runaway win and look forward to what might happen in next year's title battle. And change appears to be afoot in both British and Irish racing. Last week we revealed further details of the Savile plan that British racing's leaders are currently looking at, and we also revealed significant changes too, to the scheduling of some of the major Irish jumps races in deep winter. Plenty then to discuss on this week's Front Page. Okay Keith, let's start with you. We referenced earlier on that we're in this crossover period. We're looking ahead to the start of the jump season, and some significant news from Ireland this week on how the Irish jump season might look in 2023, certainly across November and December.
Yeah, it was in Britain and Ireland. It looks to be that we're ossifying around two seasons almost, doesn't it? We're looking at the build up to Christmas, the Christmas festivals, and then building up to the spring. Ireland have rejigged some of their big meetings in November and early December to try and really put that sort of route on tracks, to be honest. You know, we've got a rejig of the Fortria Chase and the Troy Town, and then we've got the Morgan and the John Durkin also moving around, and into the same bit, which you would argue is probably the strongest run of weekends in Britain before Cheltenham, really. So we've got a lot of jumps races congregating around the same weekends, alongside no actual fixture list from Ireland for 2023 yet, which is causing a little bit of consternation over there. They usually get released in September, the Irish fixtures for the following year, but we still don't know a lot of the jumps, the second half of this jump season. So instead, we're getting trailed some of the innovations for the season that's coming up in a year's time.
What's interesting, Keith, I think in many ways, is this is about how the jump season is presented, presumably the main focus being on how it's presented to the sports customers, that those who pay to go racing, those who watch racing on television. It runs parallel to changes that are being proposed in British jump racing for how the season will look across here in the future. And it also sort of sits with changes that have already taken place in Ireland to that January-February programme with the Dublin Racing Festival. What used to be lots of disparate Saturday-Sunday meetings have been brought together for one weekend. To what extent do you think those changes that have already taken place and those changes that are being proposed for the future will actually have a material benefit in how many people are interested and engaged in jump racing?
It does seem to be that these changes in particular, they're geared towards engagement as live. These festivals are looking to bring more people through the doors. Gordon Elliott said that specifically when he was asked about these changes. In terms of a viewing person at home, you know, somebody who's watching on RTV or on ITV, the likelihood is they'll get more ITV coverage at the Irish tracks through doing it this way, because ITV have shown during this summer for sure that they're not shy at all about putting Irish racing on the main channel. You know, they're actively doing it quite a lot. They showed a lot of classic trials in amongst some Sunday series fixtures, I think it was. So we've got here a potential to get more Irish racing on terrestrial television. It's going to create more, I've forgotten a very obvious word there, more congestion around for the fan who tries to follow everything. But for those that like to dip in and out and like to follow on one day a week, it's looking like you're going to get all your action thick and fast in the coming years, really. And it becomes a case of whether you're prioritising that audience over the audience that wants a little bit more breathing space and likes to extend the racing over the week. And look, I'm not privy to the decisions that they go through and the routes they take, but it looks like a side's been picked for sure.
Do you think it's a positive, progressive move?
It seems positive to me, certainly, because as we all know, the jump season in Britain and Ireland is so geared towards the C word in March, Cheltenham. So anything that boosts the programme, boosts engagement with the programme pre-Christmas has to be a good thing.
Yeah.
And we all know you don't need to be a genius to know that attendances are going the wrong way due to a myriad of factors. And actually, if you can create a compelling product like this, loath to call it a product, but where you're kind of concentrating good stuff in one place, saying you have no excuse not to come racing now because look at all these good races we're putting on one after the other, come and get involved, it follows logically. Yeah, I think it's a great idea. And it's nice to see how quickly they've been able to sort of bring this change in, and whether something similar would happen in Britain without uproar, I don't know.
Because the situation is slightly different in that Horse Racing Ireland is a more powerful governing body. It owns some of the racecourses that we're talking about. I'm not necessarily sure that things like the Dublin Racing Festival have made a material difference, for example, to how Irish racing has been succeeding on the racecourse. I think that would have happened anyway, but I think on this one it might have a difference in the sense that you're increasing the gap between those November races, December races and the big Christmas festivals at Leopardstown, Limerick and of course over here. I thought what was also interesting last week is that Bill Barber had that front page piece where he revealed more details of the Savile plan, one of the big ticket items that British racing industry leaders have been looking at recently as part of the strategy review. And there is a parallel, I think, between what is happening in Ireland and here, because part of what Bill revealed was this desire to concentrate on Saturdays, Sundays and big midweek festivals, although it seems to me that we do that anyway as it is, but also by categorising meetings as premier meetings and races as premier races to try to draw people's attention to those contests. Is that needed, and will it make any difference whatsoever to how the public engage with the sport?
Well, you'd like to think so. I've always been a big believer in you need to dress the shop window properly to get people in and engage with the rest of it. So the Saturdays and big festivals have to be promoted, they have to be properly funded, they have to be pushed in the right way. We do that anyway, let's get it right. You know, the Saturdays on ITV are the bigger days, and in Ireland their big festivals are the big draws. But anything that sort of differentiates them even more, I'm willing to see. Whether it has a material impact on attendances, I'm not entirely sure, and engagement, but it makes sense to me to single them out as premier fixtures, premier, and to differentiate them from the midweek stuff. So long as the midweek stuff doesn't suffer as a result, that would be my only concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And Keith, if we move from the midweek stuff to Sundays, part of the Savile recommendations is that we need to strengthen racing on Sundays. I don't necessarily think they're talking about moving lots of Group and Grade 1 races to Sundays, but just have better quality racing on Sundays that ITV might want to broadcast. This is not a new suggestion. Lots of people have suggested it in the past, but some racecourses have found that people just don't want to go racing on Sundays. It works at some tracks, it doesn't work at others. How big an advocate would you be of strengthening the Sunday programme, and will it work?
I've been an advocate of strengthening the Sunday programme for 15 years. It's a massive trick missed, I believe. I think the evidence we've seen in recent years, we've had a little bit more evidence to go on, really, in terms of things like the Sunday series that we mentioned about 5 minutes ago. That has shown a lot of interest and shown the appetite's there for Sunday racing. However, it seems to be, for attendance-wise, I thought it would be a massive attendance winner, and it maybe hasn't been that to the same extent we thought, but it has been a massive winner for betting turnover, as I understand it. So there are definitely benefits to be had through it. People we know from watching what we watch in terms of the engagement with our sites and our channels and the Racing Post, we know engagement tends to ramp up as the week goes on. So there's a much greater ROI, return on investment, from putting things on a Sunday and saving your big bullets for the weekend over running them midweek. So I think a lot of better Sunday diet will help the sport. We just need to work on where it assists the sport, because some people might see a bigger Sunday programme and reckon it's all for the bookies because they're the ones that would get the greatest benefit of it. But obviously greater turnover does have some sort of benefits for the sport, but the bigger Sunday programme is something we should have been doing 10, 15 years ago. What I want to hear more from people like Saville is the how. Because everybody, as you say, everybody's had the idea. People like Saville are the ones that can tell us how it happens.
Yeah, I think what is positive is that people are talking about change. Change might not always work, and we've seen things that have been enacted in the past that were innovative ideas that haven't always borne fruit. But at least if the sport in Britain and Ireland is trying to make itself better, then that is something that we should applaud. Right, my turn now, and last week in Newmarket something remarkable happened, not on the Rolling Mile Racecourse or on the July course, but at Park Paddocks, the home of Tattersalls, where the most important and most prestigious yearling sale in Britain, the Book 1 of the Tattersalls October yearling sale took place, and there were fireworks aplenty. Anyone who read James Thomas's reports in the Post will have been stunned, I think, by some of the numbers that he reported. Just looking down at my screen here, so 16 lots sold for £1 million guineas or more. 73 yearlings fetched £500,000 guineas or more. Day 2 was the highest grossing session of any sale anywhere in Europe at any time in British racing history, and I thought a particularly relevant one was turnover reached 126 million guineas. That represented a 47% year-on-year increase. The numbers are extraordinary in two ways. One, we are in a global financial crisis when there's talk of power cuts 3 times a week as we go into winter, and yet this part of the racing and bloodstock industry is able to spend such astonishing, outrageous numbers that some people might even think look obscene in the current climate. But we're also in a situation whereby in Britain, the British racing industry is once again soul searching, and quite rightly too, about British prize money at all levels. And yet we have a situation whereby the major operations are spending money, vastly more money than they ever have before, on the raw product that often will end up racing in those British races. Now you have to contextualise it, and Lewis Porteous did that in his column in today's Racing Post and pointed out that this really is a bubble, and that you look at most trainers, even competing towards the upper levels of the sport, and they face challenges that the likes of Godolphin and Coolmore do not face, and that's a really fair point. This is a bubble and it is separate to reality in many ways. And you also have to make the point that Coolmore and Godolphin, they don't get involved in British racing politics. In many ways they avoid it like the plague. But it is true that the vast majority, maybe all the horses that Godolphin bought in Newmarket last week, will end up being trained in Britain and racing primarily in Britain. Lots of the horses that Coolmore bought, their targets will be British races, and they're spending significantly more year on year for those horses, knowing that prize money in British racing isn't going to change at all. You also have to make the point that at a time when we know this sport is in a financial crisis, there are clearly still some people who are making lots of money out of horse racing. The sales companies will have done really well, or Tats will have done really well last week, just as Goffs had done really well not long earlier. You've got agents making incredibly good money. You've got breeders who did really well last week. You've got the stallion studs. The stallion owners have done incredibly well in recent years. So there are people who are doing well out of horse racing at the moment. And 2 final points to make is that what does this mean to British horse racing in terms of how we progress change on prize money? But crucially, what does it also mean in terms of British racing's efforts to get changes made through government on the levy? The sport is working hard with government to get changes made that will bring more money into the sport in terms of punters betting on international races in Britain and moving from a profits-based system to a turnover system. But do the optics of this sort of largesse, this sort of spending on horses, make it harder for British racing to convince the government that change really is needed? Jonathan, it was an extraordinary week.
Yes.
What do you think?
Certainly was. Well, you quite rightly call it a bubble, and it's worth noting that it sort of always has been a bubble. It's not the first time millions and millions have been spent in the sales ring, perhaps incongruously to the rest of the world around it. But my fear is whether that bubble will burst, in a sense, because it's good news that money's being pumped into British racing. It's because that means we've got the stallions, we've got the bloodstock to be what kind of world leaders in that front. And like you say, many of the horses will be campaigned in Britain as well. So we've still got the prestige and we've still got the proving grounds for said bloodstock to then go on and make themselves more valuable when they inevitably the circle continues and they're the ones creating the next generation. But how long will that last? That would be my concern. With prize money falling behind the rest of the world, it's one thing to have the world's best bloodstock, but you can't take the world's best bloodstock remaining in Britain and competing in Britain as a given France and other places have got far better returns. And it would be interesting to follow some of those Book One horses and see where they end up. And a lot of the horses, where's the money coming from? Who are they being bought by, and where will they end up? Will they be targeting races in the Middle East? Will they be sent abroad? It's the 90+ horses that we're most worried about over here. So it's interesting. It's good that money's being pumped in. It's good that the bloodstock is still strong here, but it's a case of how that translates long term into kind of how attractive British racing remains on the track.
Keith, what was your take on the numbers last week? Were you surprised?
Not especially, no. I mean, we talk about cost of living crisis. I'm not sure Sheikh Mohammed's looking at his gas bill, particularly. These things sort of exist in a different world, and at the same time, these are problems that go outside of racing in terms of disparities between lower levels and upper levels. It's something that exists to a far greater extent in society as a whole. But to see that money getting thrown around it's not a great look. It is the equivalent of full disclosure. We disclose all these sales fees. These are there for all to see because they're public sales. It's the equivalent of publishing all, bankers' bonuses, to take a very populist example. People might look at that and say, what's the issue? We know what the issues are. And for government and legislators who look at everything at a very high level, to be honest, most of the time, that is possibly going to materially affect the assistance we get. Racing looks buoyant, and the sales houses will seek to show that as racing looking buoyant when we know that the reality is quite different. Prize money is never going to really come into mind when Godolphin and Coolmore are concerned. The 2,000 guineas could be worth a tenner, and they would still be turning up in those races because of the prestige of them. The bubble is the watchword, because we don't know at which point that prestige will cease to be enough to get us through. That's the concern. And obviously look at jumps racing and the very lopsided position jumps racing's in too. I think when you see what's caused that with the rise of the super owners spending massive money on horses that have no bloodstock value in most cases, you're looking at what we're seeing here as being a lagging indicator. We all know what those are after the last couple of years with COVID-19 and whatnot. What is this going to translate to in 3 or 4 years' time on the racecourse? That's the concern.
And isn't it also interesting as well, Keith, if you look at what people are actually getting for their money at these sales? Jed Shields, the owner, has made a very interesting point when he said, "What's the average return, if you like, on these horses? How many of the horses that have been bought at Book One or at the Goss Orby or any of the big yearling sales? How many of those horses will actually end up making a profit, if you like, for the owners?" Certainly, if you have a horse that ends up going to stud and can stand for considerable sums, then yes. But purely based on racecourse return, very few of those horses that have been bought surely will make a profit.
Well, very few, and it's sort of a little bit always. Godolphin were spending 10 times the. I had reports of Godolphin spending 10 times what a horse would have got in a sale 15 years ago. That's sort of always been the case. But as prices inflate at the lower end too, because there's more competition for the 90 horses. The 90 horses are the key really to what happens in the longer term, as we've sort of alluded to earlier. As they get more expensive and competition from foreign markets increases in British sales, then those horses are going to have to go for more money. They're not competing for as much money as they were. They're the places where ROIs are coming into it, and stud values almost never impact, the sales of those horses. But they're going to be the real squeeze point in future. When a 90 horse is going for, let's say going up with inflation, going for 10% more every year, but the prize money has been stagnant since 2008, it comes as no surprise that the pool that can afford these horses grows smaller and smaller. It almost feels trite to say this because we've said it 100 times and other people have said it 100 times, but that's ultimately the reality of what we're facing here. And I'm not sure what happens at the very top really impacts what happens there, but what you need to really be watching out for is what the 90 horses are going for and what the horses that would run in the Cesarewitch, in the Great St Wilfrid, which, as we know, didn't even fill the big race, let alone the consolation race that's been run for it. There used to be a Silver Cambridgeshire. The Cambridgeshire didn't even really fill this year. So they're the horses that are going to impact the betting product that we have in British racing, that are going to impact the day-to-day racing and what we see on day-to-day field sizes. They're the ones to really watch out for. The obscene money that these top horses are going for, these top lots. It's an unfortunate distraction to me, and it's not going to help our cause.
I think that point about those 90 horses, Keith, is bang on the money. You referenced to Cesarewitch, Jonathan. I thought the size of the field for Cesarewitch on Saturday certainly made my jaw drop a bit. To have only 23 horses declared to run in that race. I think there's another interesting point you can make regarding these sales, and Keith argues there that it's that much harder now for most people to buy these 90 rated horses, about horses that might get to a mark of 90 because they're going up so much in value. Mm-hmm. You have a situation where traditionally sales companies, understandably for them, because they're obviously making more profits out of it, they trumpet and laud when we have these increased returns on horses, when the prices go higher and higher and higher. But sales companies are in an interesting position in that they have, if you like, two customer groups. They have people who sell the horses and people who buy the horses. Mm-hmm. And if you're the group that are buying the horses and you're not Sheikh Mohammed or MV Magnia, then what you're seeing is the price of those horses becoming more and more and more expensive. And how many industries celebrate the fact that the raw product is becoming more expensive for the majority of people to buy?
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, and it's so tricky. If you're a trainer with let's say, a sort of mid-sized yard and you're reading headlines about 2 million plus guineas horses being sold, you must think, well, what chance have I possibly got? Because they've got, not only is that potentially driving up the price of the horses they'd be looking to 90 plus, those 90 plus horses are also immensely desirable for foreign buyers who would like to race them abroad for infinitely more money. I mean, you'd be scratching your head, wouldn't you, going to the sales? And I suppose it's interesting, the point you make about how you present that, but the sales companies, like you say, they've got a twin responsibility themselves. They've got to push and promote their big wins for the sellers, but equally, it's becoming quite an elite club at the top. And I don't think that's good for anybody. As I've written before, you don't want a situation where we have super yards and superpowers who can afford to buy the best bloodstock, therefore win all the best races, therefore invest more back into it. And if you've got, that's bad enough. But then if you think that the ones at the top necessarily aren't even worried about a return on their investment, that's hugely alarming, isn't it? It's like forgive a football analogy, but it's like a Manchester City. They can go out and chuck 200 million on players and things and it'd be absolutely fine. Doesn't bother them. It doesn't matter if that player flops or if there's a return on that investment. But then if you're lower down the Premiership and you're trying to buy a player at your level, suddenly that you're paying twice as much for them because the market's been inflated. What do? It has the potential to get out of hand. But while kind of eye-catching this time, this is not a new thing, as Keith quite rightly points out. This has been going on for a while. There's almost two different worlds now in the sales ring. There's those who can and those who have to try their absolute best to find a bargain.
I think that's right.
The super yachts are already here, guys. We're talking about how Ganopin are spending all this money. every weekend there's a big 2-year-old race, there's at least one Appleby horse in there. The Super Yard's already here. We're just seeing a lagging indicator that it's going to get more pronounced.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And if we talk about two different worlds, in many ways we'll see the real world at Tats this week with Book 2 and Book 3 of the October yearlings. Now, in many ways that will give a clearer indication to what the real world is in horse racing at the moment. But if you are one of those who had champagne corks popping last week, really many congratulations to you. And I think looking at what we saw at Book 1, the 2024 Wood Ditton should be an absolute humdinger. Right, next up is Jonathan Harding. And Jonathan, you are talking about a new champion jockey.
Yes, absolutely. So we're all gearing up towards Champions Day. You looking forward to it?
Yeah, I love Champions Day. I really like Champions Day. I'd like more people to maybe want to watch Champions Day, not just on the racecourse, but on television. But I love Champions Day.
Brilliant. Well, you're going to have a new champion on Champions Day. William Buick is, I've written down here, strolling towards his first championship. He is and he isn't.
He won't feel like he's been strolling.
No, absolutely not. He's 60 winners clear of Holly Doyle at the latest count and was in typically imperious form at Newmarket. I've written down here 6 winners Friday and Saturday, just the 6 winners, talking about super yards and things. But yep, he's riding out of his skin. He's going to win the championship at a canter. But it's kind of, I suppose the story here is he's had to wait for it, obviously, with Oisin Murphy and the various sort of contention around that in previous years. He's hungrier than ever, riding better than ever, and this is his crowning moment on Saturday. So I'd be interested to get your guys' view on where he ranks for you among the fellow British jockeys.
Yeah, actually, well, Keith, well, you're the best person to ask. You're our betting editor. You are tipping horses and therefore tipping jockeys all the time. How highly do you rate William Buick?
The interesting thing about Buick for me is that I think he's got better as he's got further ahead. As it's got more clear that he's going to win the jockey's title this year, he's become probably the best rider in the country just now. It seems to be self-fulfilling to an extent. There seems to be this idea, he's the cock of the school now. So he gets even the outside Godolphin rides, he's getting first take on a lot of them. And the confidence that comes with that, and the confidence that comes with having a big job like he's got with Appleby, is what is helping him just scale those heights. And it's an interesting one because Buick's never been a jockey who's lacked for confidence. In fact, if anything, maybe 5-10 years ago, a lot of the accusations against Buick would have been that he showed too much confidence in his races. He used to give a lot of horses a bit too much to do, but he's matured a little bit more. He's far more proactive in his races. And he's developed that knack that only the top jockey of the moment tends to have at any one time, and that's always getting in the right position. Ryan Moore had it, 5 years ago. He still does it to a large extent, to be honest. He's still, he's not getting pushed out here. He just doesn't ride in Britain quite as much and ride day to day as much as Buick. But that's the thing that marks out the very, very best jockeys. It's being in the right place in races so consistently. And Buick has it at the moment, and it's no coincidence that second to him is going to be Holly Doyle, because she demonstrates much the same attributes. With the same ammunition, would Doyle be on Buick's heels? Maybe. But the sort of bottom line really is that Buick is getting the best rides. He's using having those best rides to become a better jockey and a more confident jockey, and it's taken him to where he is, and he's undoubtedly the best rider in Britain at the moment.
In terms of that Keith, he's undoubtedly the best rider in Britain at the moment, and obviously you said the numbers underline that. I thought one of the interesting things of this season, particularly in Britain on the flat, has been the extent to which jockeys who haven't normally been associated with winning Group 1 races have really shone. We had a derby in which Richard Kingscote, David Probert, Rob Hornby filled the first 3 places. Rob Hornby's had lots of big wins this season. Rab Havlin had his first Group 1 winner at Newmarket on Friday. Does that indicate that maybe there are more people who should be competing at the top table if they had the chances?
Oh, absolutely. We've talked about it with horses, and the same goes for humans. I mean, we had this debate there's a lot of comparison between racing and Formula One. We had this in Formula One 25 years ago, where who was in the best car would win the title. When Williams had that dominance in the mid-90s and Schumacher was the best driver and everybody knew it. There's a lot of that going on, but what would have to happen? You've got to say Buick's the best jockey because he sort of is at the moment. That's not to say that if in a Freaky Friday happened and Rob Hornby all of a sudden was Godwin's #1 jockey, with that year or 2 years to learn, grow in confidence, become a better jockey, that Hornby would be doing it. To be honest, people like Richard Kingscote and Luke Morris, who obviously won the Arc last week, we've known for years that they're really, really good jockeys that just haven't had the opportunities that a Buick would have had. So Buick is standing on the shoulders of his benefactors. We know that's the case, but you can't argue the opposite. It's very hard to prove a negative. You can't prove what Rob Hornby would do with that job because, say, he's not the sort of guy to grow in that job. I don't know. He might be. He might do an even better job than Buick. But we can't get into hypotheticals, because part of why Buick's so successful is not just sitting on the best horses. It's how you use the knowledge that you're sitting on the best horses. It's how you deal with the pressure of riding for a massive organisation while also having the job security that he sort of has that maybe others maybe don't. A lot of jockeys are having to sing for their supper, and that will reflect in how they ride. I thought watching the Racing League actually was very interesting in that regard, because these were jockeys who weren't put on horses by the owners, rather by the team captains. And on quite a few occasions, I saw a difference in how jockeys rode because of who they were answering to and who the stakeholders were in that ride. So there's a lot going on there. It's more than just going out and getting a horse third on the rail and bombing out. There's a lot more to it than that. Buick is the best at the moment because he's getting all the opportunities and making the best of them. I'm afraid I can't tell you who the best would be if they all were able to sit on all these Appleby million guineas yearling purchases, because we can't have that. Buick's done a very good job and become a much, much better jockey for having that opportunity over the last few years, and that's all we can say with certainty.
Just before we come to Jonathan, one more question to you, Keith. To what extent, when you are tipping horses and backing horses, do you factor in who is riding those horses?
Quite a lot, yeah. I mean, the fact of who is riding, whether that's an unusual jockey booking or an improved jockey booking, comes into my thinking quite a lot. When it comes to somebody like Buick, it doesn't do an awful lot because everybody's onto Buick. The Buick's at the stage now where there'll be lucky 15s on his rides on a day. That's the sort of stage we're at with him. Whereas, somebody in my position or Paul Keeley's position, Tom Siegel's, we've got to go a little bit beyond that into, well, is Buick the right sort of person for this horse? Or, Spencer's the obvious example that Tom Siegel brings up all the time. So you're looking at how the jockey's style marries with a certain horse. We're looking at whether the jockey performs well given the horses they get to sit on. It's jockeys come into our thinking an awful lot. You'd be surprised at how little the top jockeys come into our thinking along those lines, because as far as we're concerned, the very fact of Buick sitting on a horse is often enough to take the juice out of any horse's price. So it's more about it's the jockey's equivalent to the 90 horses that are the big thing for us when we're looking at races. But you always notice when you're reading races, you see who the best jockeys are, and at the moment, the most confident jockey is Buick.
In terms of those jockeys, one that we haven't been talking about this year in terms of racecourse action is Oisin Murphy, the previous champion jockey, the current champion jockey until Saturday. William was asked about what might happen next year at Newmarket on Saturday. It was put to him that the 2023 title could be a harder fought battle. He said, will it? We'll see. I'm aware of everything that was said and written about what happened last year, but it's not for me to say. It's up to the people who regulate the rules. There's clearly been a backstory there between what's happened between the two jockeys in the last 2 years, in terms of people will say that William Buick could have been champion jockey. Last year had things played out differently in terms of the regulation of Oisin Murphy. How interesting do you think next year's title is going to be if both those guys are going for it?
I've always been one of those people who's a little bit sceptical about title races, trainers and jockeys and things, but I got so into it last year, the Buick and Murphy back and forth, not least because of the sort of outside situation with Murphy. It's he's battered the question away, but it's quite a loaded answer, I think, from Buick, as loaded as, someone who tends to play his cards fairly close to his chest. He's certainly not shying away from the challenge with that will it rhetorical question. I think he's going to be absolutely bang up for a bit of a title race with Murphy next year. Whether Murphy himself will be interested in it, given I think he's spoken before about how the championship had a slightly adverse effect on him because it is a slog. But look, it'll be fascinating. They're two clearly high class jockeys, and the thing that strikes me so much about Buick is it used to be a case where you'd say, well, it was either quality or quantity. You either had a retainer and rode good horses and rode on the Saturdays like a Frankie Dettori, or you did a Silvestre de Souza and you went day to day to day riding a silly amount of horses and getting loads of winners. But he's somehow managed to ride not only a lot of winners, clearly, to be 60 clear, but he's also had the quality as well. And Oisin Murphy's we might be seeing sort of a new breed of champion jockey who can juggle the two. And Oisin Murphy and Buick are cut from similar cloth in that sense, both very driven. So look, bring on 2023 as far as the championship goes.
Yep, absolutely. And if I can just end with a tiny little hot back to pass. When I started working on racecourses, I spent a lot of Saturday afternoons at Lingfield in the all-weather season. Walter Buick, William's father, was a race reader for the Press Association in those days, and he often brought William with him. He would sit quietly in press rooms, incredibly well-behaved young boy, and that young boy has gone on to become the champion jockey. And for those of us who sat in those press rooms in those days, that is a delight to see. Congratulations to William Buick. Okay, it's time to end this edition of the Front Page. Jonathan Harding, my esteemed colleague, has pointed out to me that he has yet to appear on one of these programmes where the host hasn't picked their story as the winning story. This week I'm picking my story as the winning story because although I think what Keith and Jonathan have presented are really strong, interesting, engaging stories, in Jonathan's case, William Buick becoming champion jockey, and in Keith's case, those changes to the Irish jump season, I do think that the spending spree at Tats last week was a very, very big story indeed. It tells us a lot about a certain part of the bloodstock industry, and it throws our minds forwards to what's happening this week in books 2 and 3, which will tell us an awful lot, about how the industry really is. That then was the latest edition of the Front Page, and I leave you with an important announcement. That is that the world's #1 horse racing app just got better. Please do head to the App Store to download or update for free the latest version of the Racing Post app, and that includes free daily tips from a star-studded lineup. You really should do it. Thank you for doing that, and thank you for watching this latest edition of the Front Page. We'll see you all again next week. Bye-bye.